Okay, so continuing our um, October-November 2016 paper. So we had the last 15 MCQs to do in this video because we cut one of the earlier videos a little short. Anyhow, so question 15. The government wants to regulate the consumption of a demerit good in order to increase society's net welfare. In which situation would the society's net welfare increase? The fall in marginal social benefit is greater than the fall in marginal social cost. And B says the fall in marginal social cost is greater than the fall in marginal social benefit. Now, the issue with these two is normally we look at marginals while trying to figure out the optimum, socially optimum level of output for merit and demerit goods. That is true. We do equate MSC with MSB, but that's pretty much all they can help us out with. If we're just looking at falls and rises, and we're not really sure where we're starting off with, that really won't be the case. For example, let's take let's take B for example. It says the fall in marginal social cost is greater than the fall in marginal social benefit. But let's say the social cost was this much, social benefit was this much. Now, even if social cost is falling at a faster rate than social benefit, it doesn't really matter that much because the absolute value of social cost is so much that even if it falls at a faster rate, your net welfare hasn't increased. You might be moving towards optimum allocation, but your net welfare hasn't increased. Which is why when you talk about net, usually in these questions you have to look at absolute values rather than marginals, because clearly this isn't a case where we're equating MSC with MSB. If the question had been something which asks us to figure out where you're moving towards the socially optimum level, then that might be different. Then we might look at marginals, but not in this case. They're just asking us to figure out where net welfare is increasing. And net welfare, so the idea of net is basically where you take social benefit and you subtract social cost. And if you subtract this is still positive, or since they want an increase, that this is more positive than it was before. That's the idea. So for this case, we'll be looking at totals rather than marginals. So the fall in social benefit is greater than the fall in social cost? Not really, because if social benefit falls by more than social cost, well, then how will you get a more positive value? But if the fall in social cost is greater than the fall in total social benefit, then since social cost is what's being subtracted, only then will you get a more positive value, will net welfare increase. So it'll be D in this case. So 16, which measure is least likely to help a household out of the poverty trap? So basically, which measure is most likely to keep the household in a poverty trap? If it's least likely to help, it's most likely to contribute or keep the household in the poverty trap. And the poverty trap, basically, a lot of people just simplify this to just keep the household in poverty, but it's a little more than that. It's more about keeping the household in the circle of poverty and hindering any attempts of the household to break out of that cycle of poverty. That's a more better, not a more better, well, that's a better definition or an explanation of it. Anyhow, so changing a universal benefit to a means tested benefit. So universal benefit, to my knowledge, is a benefit that you just provide to anyone. So like free healthcare for anyone. A means tested benefit means that you have to show that you're needy or that you have income below a certain level to get that benefit. So like people that have annual incomes below a certain level, only they will receive access to free healthcare and free education and stuff of that sort. I think this would be it would be A, because obviously if you're changing a universal benefit to a means tested benefit, means tested benefits do contribute to keeping households in the poverty trap or being least likely to help them out of the poverty trap. Because when you're getting free healthcare if you earn less and free education, you're less likely to want to work more, put in those extra hours, and increase your income, right? And even if you do increase your income, well, then you have all of these costs of healthcare and education, because the benefits then go away, which kind of puts you back in the poverty trap, keep you in the cycle of poverty. um, a benefit might not necessarily make you poor, but it might entrap you, you know, in that particular income level, because you get benefits only when you're at that income level. um, Increasing the threshold at which income tax is paid. So increasing the threshold um, at which income tax is paid. I believe the idea here is like, before, if for this much income you didn't pay income tax, now the threshold has been increased. So for this much income, you won't pay income tax, and after this threshold only will you start to pay income tax. If that is the case, then this is likely to help a household break out of poverty, because you have a lot more income, over which you won't be taxed. So here it won't keep you in the poverty trap. It'll help you out of it. Some people might confuse this by saying, like, well, no income tax, well, it's kind of like a disincentive for you to increase income, uh, because you're going to get taxed above a certain income threshold. But what they fail to understand in this question is that, well, income tax was there anyways, just the threshold has changed. In A, the benefit itself, has changed to one that incentivizes people not to increase their income. So that is a little different. There's a little difference between A and B in that case. If you introduce a national minimum wage, that will only help these people. If you reduce the basic rate of income tax, that will only help these people, because they'll have to pay less tax. The addition to revenue which results from employing one additional unit of a factor of production, the quantities of all other factors of production remaining constant. What does this define? It defines marginal revenue product. So you increase one factor of production, and that factor of production produces and your produces a particular product. We call that marginal physical product. And when you multiply that by price, you get marginal revenue product, which is obviously the addition to revenue because of the employment of that one additional unit of factor of production. So this is different. Don't confuse this with marginal revenue. It will be marginal revenue if you increase quantity of the product by one. Here you're increasing quantity of the factor employed by one. So there's a little difference there. The diagram shows the demand supply of labor, which two areas represent economic rent. So economic rent would be this. This is all transfer. These are all just transfer earnings, because it's a perfectly elastic supply curve. So you'll just leave that. Economic rent would be this, leaving you 1 and 4. The table shows the short-run production function of a firm with labor as variable factor of production. If workers are hired in a perfectly competitive labor market at a wage rate of 40 per day, when will labor cost per unit of output be at its lowest? So labor cost per unit of output. So if we look at labor cost is going to be 50 here, because wage rate is 50, and one unit is going to be 100 here. It's going to be 150, 200, and 250. So this is going to be your labor cost, and you have to look at labor cost per unit of output. So you just divide that by output. So that 50 upon 10 should give you 5. This should give you also 5. This should give you, well, it'll give you 15 upon 4, and my mental math was never the best. 15 divided by 4. So that's 3.75. This should give you and what will 250 divided by 60 give you? Well, that'll give you 4.17. You can clearly say that this is where your labor cost per unit of output is the lowest. And the way I did this, I took the number of workers, I multiplied that by 50, because that is the wage rate. This gave me your labor cost, but we wanted per unit output, so divided it by the total output. So this is how I worked out this particular column. So 3.37 is clearly the lowest, which is where when you have 3 workers, so that is B. Over a given period, the amount of overtime worked in a manufacturing industry increases. What is likely to be a consequence of this? A decrease in employment. That's unlikely, although one could say that the same worker is like, what does one say? That the same worker is producing more output, but but still, that doesn't really mean that you decrease employment just because someone's working harder or someone's working a little overtime. Um, that doesn't necessarily mean you fire other people. It doesn't normally how things work, and overtime increase over time is not normally something that continuously happens in the long run either. It's just something like, okay, over a certain period, demand was high, people worked overtime. That's it. Then they went back to working normally, working at their normal hours. So you don't normally fire people or start to downsize because of that. A decrease in the rate of inflation. I mean, so your output would increase, so your aggregate supply, so cost push inflation might decrease. But if you really think about it, a demand pull inflation might increase because, well, you're obviously going to be paid for overtime, so you have increased incomes, consumption, stuff of that sort. So you can't really say that inflation rate will decrease for sure. You can't be sure about it. Anyhow, a more rapid growth in average earnings than in early wage rates, and that's likely to be true because normally for overtime work you get paid more, um, depending on the profession, but one can say you usually get paid more. So the idea here is um, that your average earnings are obviously going to be the amount you earn, if you're looking for one worker, the amount you earn upon maybe the hours that you work. Um, so your hourly wage rate is going to be fixed, but because for overtime you get paid more, your average earnings should grow. They should grow by more. Then your wage rates, they should be higher. If you look at D, a more rapid growth in manufacturing output than in productivity, and perhaps one could say that output would be higher than productivity, but that's not what they said here. They said that the growth in output is greater than productivity. Productivity itself won't grow. In fact, productivity might just fall or remain the same. In fact, it's likely to fall because you're working longer. So it's incorrect to say that there's a more rapid growth because productivity isn't growing, it is in fact falling. If you look at C, then your hourly wage rates, well, they're fixed for now, but they normally are on an upward trend. Like if you look at it from like 5 years, and if you're working like 5 years in a particular place, your hourly wage rates are going to be increasing, so they are going to be growing slowly, very very slow though. So that's why I just said, like, yeah, they're more or less fixed. But your average earnings are going to go up because you're going to get paid more for the overtime you've worked. 21. What is a common characteristic of developing economies? They usually have a large agricultural sector, not a small one. Extensive underemployment, and well, that does happen at times. Don't normally save much. In fact, they spend a lot because the poor normally have a higher MPC. They don't have stable export earnings because a lot of their exports are dependent on the primary sector, which are obviously not stable. So underemployment or unemployment, that's going to be your answer. The diagram shows data on various aspects of 4 countries. Which country is likely to be least developed? So if you look at average years of schooling, the smallest, the least here is gonna be least developed. So that is country D. GDP has to be the smallest as well, so that is also country D. Life expectancy has to be the smallest as well, so that is also country D. And percentage of population in rural areas has to be larger because normally when you develop, um, your population stops living in rural areas. You develop those rural areas and they become urbanized. So if a large percentage of your country still lives in rural areas, that's an indication that you aren't developed, that you are least developed. Because if you were to develop, then your country would undergo a process of urbanization. So that is also D, which gives you D in all of these cases. If the MPC in an economy in a given period becomes greater than unity, this must mean that consumers will be spending more than they're earning, and that seems fine. inflation will be generated in the economy. Not necessarily people are consuming more, but who knows? Aggregate supply might increase, investment might decrease. We don't know that. It has to be must here. The country will suffer a trade deficit, but that is possible if you consume on imports. But again, it's not a must. Exports could increase. We don't really know. We can't say for sure. The marginal propensity to save will be negative. Now, that does, in a way, make sense because now MPC plus MPS is equals to 1. So if this is greater than 1, if this is like 1.2 plus MPS is, so MPS, well, it would be something into like 0.2, because obviously, I mean, and this is irrespective of whether or not you're in a two-sector economy, three-sector, or a four-sector. You could just, even if you do it for a four-sector economy, since your marginal propensity to withdraw is 1 minus MPC, so uh, the fact that this is more than 1 would clearly mean that your withdrawals overall would be negative. So your MPS would still have to be negative unless another withdrawal was negative, which is unlikely. So the idea here is marginal propensity to save would definitely have to be negative because you have a certain addition to disposable income, and if you're spending all of it, like the idea behind MPC is that change in consumption to change in income, and the idea behind MPS was change in savings to change in income. Clearly, if you're getting like if your addition to income was like 10 and you're spending, let's say, 12 of it, so you're spending more than what you got in addition, as your additional income, then you'd have to be withdrawing from your savings. So you're meaning your MPS would be negative. So D has to be correct. If you look at A, consumers will be spending more than they are earning. Now, there's a little issue with A, which is why I can cross it out, because consumers, this will be true with APC. Now, the issue with MPC is that the MPC doesn't remain constant throughout your entire range of income. So let's say this much was your income. This was your income, or a better way to denote it would be this is your income. Now, let's say we looked at MPC this much for this last amount of income. Now, this would be very different. So let's say if you look at MPC over here, I mean, through these two intervals would yield a very different value of MPC. So perhaps here your MPC is greater than 1, is greater than unity, but because your MPCs throughout this range of income is less than 1, you might still be earning this much and spending less than it, because your APC could still be positive because your APC is consumption upon income. So your MPC, which is change in consumption over change in income, might look at a very specific change in income, for which you're consuming more, if you look at that particular change in income. However, you might balance that by the income that you earned at some other different income level. So like if you earn $100 and for to calculate my MPC, I used your change in consumption for the 99th to the 100th dollar, let's say. That just because you spent more than $1 for that calculation of MPC doesn't mean you can't use the rest of your $99 to satisfy that if you had a lower MPC for the other range of values of your income. So in that particular case, it's not necessarily it doesn't have to mean that you're spending more than you're earning. It's possible, but it doesn't have to be true. But your MPS has to be true, has to be negative, because for that particular income interval change, you spent more than that particular income interval change. So which meant that for that particular income interval change, you withdrew from your savings. So which is why MPS has to be negative. Which row correctly identifies net leakages from the circular flow of income? So trade surplus, exports minus imports would clearly mean um, that this is an injection, not a leakage. So it's wrong. Government budget deficit. Now the government budget is tax revenue minus government expenditure. They kind of reversed this around just to give you the direct formula for the budget, but I prefer to use the proper formula. So if this is positive, it's a surplus. We don't want that. If this is negative, um, it's a deficit. So if it's negative, which means government expenditure is greater than, let's say, tax revenue, but government expenditure is an injection. So this basically means that your injection is greater than your tax revenue or your taxes, which was basically your withdrawal. So this is overall an injection, not a leakage. So you can cross this out as well, which clearly gives you D. Private sector surplus, saving minus investment. So if there's a surplus, which means saving is greater than, let's say, investment, that is good because saving um, is a leakage. So this is a case of net leakage, of net leakages. 25, the table shows levels of consumption, expenditure, and savings for given family incomes. Over the range of disposable income shown, the income as income rises, the MPC, okay, and so for MPC, the formula that you're going to use is change in consumption over change in income. And hopefully now you'll see, as you know, as disposable income rises, your MPC doesn't necessarily, over the entire range of family income, your MPC, it might remain the same, it might not. That's what I was trying to explain in the previous question MCQ. However, what you should know, so for all of these intervals, as you can see, the change in income is 1,000. So your denominator value is a constant of 1,000. What really matters is your numerator value. And I'll just quickly put this in my calculator and just figure out the changes in consumption expenditure. All right, so there you go. So remember, your change in interval of your income is the same. So the denominator is the same, but the numerator, however, is decreasing from 950 to 730. So which means your MPC has to fall continuously. So there was 950, then it was 950 upon 1,000, then it's 900 upon 1,000, then it's 850 upon 1,000. So your MPC is basically going to be falling continuously. What would cause an increase in the transactions demand for money? Now remember, your transactionary and your precautionary demand for money are functions of income. So especially your transactionary demand for money, so if the income of an individual goes up, your transactions would increase, and hence your transactionary demand for money would go up. So price of bonds fall in price of bonds would increase interest rate, but this is not a function of interest rate, that is speculative. If your nominal national income increases, well then yeah, that would increase your transaction demand for money, because that's exactly what it is a function of. Interest rate isn't a function. An increase in unemployment, if unemployment increases, that kind of reduces GDP and reduces national income. So that might cause a decrease in the transaction demand, would definitely not increase it. Government economic advisors disagree over the relative impacts of fiscal and monetary controls. What is most likely to be the first stage at which, a time lag will occur? So they've talked about the introduction, the operational effectiveness, the recognition of the existence of the problem, and the selection of the appropriate policy. Now, so what happens first? You recognize there's a problem. You what do you do then? You then select a policy. You then introduce the policy, and then the policy has to have operational effectiveness. Now, one thing we should all know for sure, this definitely has a time lag. Operational effectiveness has a huge time lag because of automatic stabilizers and all of those problems. So but the question here is it this the first stage? If you can even find a single stage before that has a time lag, your answer should not be B then. So the selection of a policy, so introducing a policy definitely doesn't have a time lag, because introducing a policy, it's literally like, okay, we selected this as fiscal policy, now we're bringing it in. So like there you go. So selection of a policy definitely does have a time lag, because like literally they've literally given it to you. They've like spoon fed you that much. Like economic advisors disagree over the relative impacts of fiscal and monetary controls. So literally there's going to be debate. There's going to be disagreements. There's going to be no this that. You'll have to push a vote in whatever domestic parliament or so on you have. So um, the selection definitely does have some time lag, and because the selection has a time lag, it's definitely above or before operational effectiveness, which means you can cross out operational effectiveness as well. The only question that remains is, does recognition of the existence of the problem have a time lag? And I'd be inclined to say no, which could cross this out and give you D as your answer, because I mean, the stats available for your current economic standing are pretty quickly available, and like I mean, like they're there, man. Like open the newspaper, you'll see your growth rate, you'll see a rough estimate of your unemployment rates and so on. Um, I don't see how it's very difficult or takes a lot of time to recognize the existence of a problem. Like even your common man can figure out what's the problem pretty quickly, because in this day and age, because of the availability of statistics, that they might not be very accurate, but like a pretty good idea is available. I wouldn't call that a time lag. So which makes selection a time lag. What has not accompanied global economic growth over the last 25 years? So non-renewable resources have been depleted. I would say it's B, because international trade has increased over the last 25 years as globalization takes hold of the world. It has not decreased. Urbanization has happened. Atmospheric pollution has happened. Which policy pursued by a central bank represents a contractionary monetary policy? So a contractionary monetary policy would be one where aggregate demand is falling. So a reduction in the interest rate sorry, this is not the normal interest rate. It is a reduction in the interest rate at which it will lend to banks. But even this should increase aggregate demand, because, well, if if banks can borrow, this makes basically it easier for banks to borrow from the central bank should they ever loan too much. So, which means that they will loan if more freely, that they will increase loans, because they know even if the loan isn't paid back in time, and they have to, you know, liquefy some other individuals' deposit, it's fine. They can easily borrow from the central bank, or at least it's easier to borrow now from the central bank than it was before, because the interest rates have gone down. So if loans are going up, money supply goes up, and AD goes up, not down. So because monetary demand pull inflation. Okay. So a reduction in the minimum cash to deposit ratios of banks. Now, if it, the minimum cash to deposit ratio, if that decreases, this will clearly increase money supply, because now if you get a deposit of $100, let's say, before you needed to keep at least 10 of this like in cash, so you could only loan out 90 of it. Now you could only need to keep 5 of it in cash, so you can loan out 95 of it. Clearly shows how money supply has increased. Also, since your credit multiplier was 1 upon the liquidity ratio, which is basically this ratio, so a decrease in this, if liquidity ratio goes down, then your credit multiplier will go up, which should also increase money supply, which is not what you want. The purchase of foreign currency to influence the country's exchange rate. If you purchase foreign currency, that hmm, so that means uh, that you supply your own currency, and if the supply of your own currency goes about, well, that would probably increase your aggregate demand, because, well, if you supply your own currency, that's likely to increase local money supply as well. So that should increase aggregate demand. Also, if you supply your own currency, that's likely to reduce your exchange rate. And since in this day and age, usually exports and imports are elastic, that should mean your export revenue goes up and your import expenditure goes down, which also increases aggregate demand. It does not decrease it. If you look at D, that would be your right answer. So it took us a while. Because if you sell government bonds in the open market, people buy those bonds and hence pay that money to the government. So it goes, so that money, that liquidity goes away from the domestic economy, and hence money supply goes down, and hence aggregate demand goes down. Which policy's principal aim is to ensure sound public finances, your budget, basically your tax revenue and stuff of that sort. So that is going to be fiscal policy. So let's quickly check our answers for these 15 MCQs. Yeah, so we were all good. We marked all the right answers for this video, and with that, we conclude this particular paper.